All right. All right. Sydney Abrams, correct?
Correct.
Sid, to your friends. Sid, this interview, I just want you to know, is I didn't have a lot of time to do a lot of research on you, so this interview is really a lot about what you're going to tell me. I'm going to guide through the questions, but I want you to tell me where you were born and what kind of household you grew up in and your parents' background.
I was born in Seattle, and incidentally, my grandfather on my mother's side, who was from the Ukraine, was a homesteader in eastern Washington, in Republic, Washington. That's another history. I grew up you probably want to know how Jewish was the home.
Well,
it was very Jewish. My father was very religious, as religious as could be for someone who was reeking out a living as a tailor from Lithuania. And my mother came with her mother to join the father in Republic, Washington, when she was about 3 or 5 years old. That was around 1900.
Okay, so let's put it this way. Your father, where was your father born and what was his name?
Lithuania. His name was Samuel Louis Abramovich.
Abramovich. So then you changed the name to Abrams.
In the army. When World War I.
He changed the name.
They changed the name.
Yeah. From Abramovich to Abrams.
Yes.
And where was your mother born? And what was her name?
Rose Kossen, Kossen, and she was born in the Ukraine. I don't remember the name of the small town, but she was born. Her mother had a farm, which was very unusual for a Jew to own land.
Very unusual.
And therefore, her father, who was raised on the farm, became a carpenter. He became a blacksmith, and he was also a very religious man. And he's the one who came to the United States, got out of New York as fast as he could, responded to an ad in a Yiddish newspaper where they recruited a group of Jewish men, or not only Jewish men, but I guess they advertised in papers were newcomers to the country, brought them to Ohio on a bus, only to learn that they were strike breakers. And so my grandfather often told me how he had no money to get out of there, to get back, to go anywhere, so he had to stay there. And then he saw another ad in the Yiddish newspaper about plenty of land available in Republic, Washington, great place, gold strike, this and that. And so he left and went to Republic, Washington, tried to farm there, was unsuccessful, dug 5 wells, and each one was dry, and he was almost killed in the 5th digging. And since he was a blacksmith, he was building his house in Republic. He also worked as a blacksmith and specialized in shoeing horses. Mm-hmm. And then came to Seattle and refused any help from the Bicker Cholim synagogue, which, as you probably know, that in every city.
Yeah, I'm listening. I'm just blowing your mind. Yeah.
In every city, there was always a Jewish organization to help the newcomers.
Sure.
But he simply took a job as a street cleaner, saved up money until he could open his own blacksmith shop. And that was
the story.
Yes, well, part of the story is that when he was working as a strikebreaker, it was for Studebaker building the carts that horses pulled. So in Seattle, he teamed up with another man who, and they were both building these wagons for horses to pull. And then when World War I came, my grandfather worked in the shipyards as his patriotic duty. And then when the war ended, he went back to build the wagons, but his partner said, no, now we're going to build bodies for trucks. And my grandfather thought that was something silly. I heard this story so many times from his wife or my mother, how the man, his partner, whose name was, oh God, it became a very famous name for trucks. And
Mac?
no, it was,
Keep on going. Yeah. I'm listening. I'm just moving the menorah right over here.
I think Peter built. It was a local company, and it became a very big and successful company. But he thought that was
Ludicrous.
yes.
What are we going to do with bodies of trucks? And he didn't do it.
And you'd have to spend money to get it to go, and so forth. Yes, it's much better to have horses. So he was.
What was your mother's maiden name?
Kossen, Kosscn.
So they were Cohens. Kossen, Cohen, Kogen. They kind of changed the name in Russia, Lithuania, so that the people wouldn't affiliate them as being. I think Kossen could be Cohen. I'm not sure.
I think in a Russian document, Kossen was spelled like Kosscin, rather, Kosscin instead of the En, but they're always a Kossen.
Kossen. I read, one thing that I did read about you is that you have a great-grandfather who was in Palestine. And have you ever heard of Yoel Moshe Salomon, the founder of Petach Tikva?
I've heard, yes, because I have a relative who's done so much family research.
Uh-huh.
She lives in Jerusalem. She's her father was the man who dedicated Mayan Baruch, because he was a chief rabbi in either Cape Town or the other major city. And he formerly taught religion at Oxford, but anyways, that was Rabbi Abrams. And during the Six-Day War, she graduated from medical school, and that she was already packed before the ceremony. The ceremony ended. She immediately went to the airport, went to go to Israel to be whatever help she could as a new doctor.
Sid, I want to go back to you now. What is the date of birth? Your date of birth?
January 15, 1927.
January 15, 1927. So that puts you are 91 years old.
Correct.
Correct. And are you the youngest, oldest? Do you have siblings?
I was the youngest out of three. I have a brother who was 6 years older, who during World War II was a lieutenant, and he had a lot. Just before World War II, he was on a crew to deliver a ship to the East Coast, where a British company was to take it over, and the ship disintegrated in the Caribbean during one of the storms, and he was one of the few who survived in that situation. So,
Who was the middle child?
my sister, who just passed away a couple of years ago, and was very unfortunate. She was a very active person, physically active, spiritually active, volunteers for always helping, and unfortunately it was not a pleasant ending in a Jewish nursing home and a terrible son.
A terrible son.
Yes.
Okay. Sid, I just need you to have eye contact with me.
Fine.
Just eye contact. It's what kind of house, what neighborhood are you born in here in Seattle? Where are you born? Is it a Jewish neighborhood?
It's very much a Jewish neighborhood. As a matter of fact, I wrote something for the Jewish Historical Society, referred to it as it was a shtetl. It was 1 square mile, and within that square mile were a few synagogues, Sephardic synagogue, Ashkenazi, a couple of Ashkenazi synagogues, and well, the Reformed synagogue was, Reformed temple.
What was the name of the neighborhood?
I don't know if it ever had a name other than we always referred to it as around Garfield High School. It was on Cherry Street. Cherry Street's probably the closest to the neighborhood name. And it was very, very Jewish. It was a Talmud Torah, and the Talmud Torah eventually became a Muslim school. I mean, many years later. It was a very nice building. And during the 9/11 tragedy, for example, my sister and her husband volunteered to walk around the building to discourage people who might want to come throw rocks or shoot guns or what have you. And
so the neighborhood was very Jewish.
Very Jewish, yes.
Very Jewish. And the household that you were born in, would you describe it as Orthodox, modern Orthodox, conservative? What kind of house were you brought up in?
It was modern Orthodox.
Modern Orthodox.
Yeah.
Did you go to public school or did you go to a Jewish school?
The Talmud Torah was the school that became the Muslim school. That was where everyone I knew went there until their bar mitzvah, at least. And that's what I did. I was there until my bar mitzvah.
So until the age of 13, you're in Talmud Torah in Seattle,
yes,
getting a full-on Jewish education, studying Hebrew, little?
Very little, and I don't think, in retrospect, I don't know how well trained the teachers were. They were, but always men who were from Europe. And
The old country.
some of them were sort of young for the old country, that is their old country, but they weren't old in age that much, but they weren't very effective teachers.
Right.
But and then it was just, had kosher butcher shops and Yiddish movies in one of the movie houses and things like that. But it was a comfortable neighborhood because most of the parents were not born in the United States.
Sure.
But of course all the kids were. And we had a Cub Scout troop that had a very large Cub Scout troop. Everyone was Jewish, wasn't required. As a matter of fact, they probably would have discouraged it, but because of the neighborhood. And we had wonderful leaders, adults who volunteered to help. And our Boy Scout troop was mostly Jewish. And
what other kind of youth? Were there any other Jewish youth movements within the neighborhood? Like
yes. Well, not really big time organized, but there was informal, and one group that I was part of. We became a part of. Oh goodness. Middle of the road type.
Maccabi? Shomer Tzair?
No. Give me a couple.
Beitar?
No, absolutely not. We were very aware of Beitar. And
Was Beitar like a no-no? Was it like,
a no-no.
why is that?
Because what we understood, their philosophy and all that, we were very much, if we were in Israel, we would have been voting labor.
Okay, so Mapai. So you're
But the youth organization was,
Hapoel?
what was
Hapoel Hatzair?
Kiev Skydel? What was he ahead
Who?
of? Kiev Skydel.
I don't know.
He was, he was a man who was professionally ahead of this organization, and he later became the recruiter for Aliyabet.
So you're in your so you can't really remember the name of the organization that you're going to as a kid, but it's a youth movement.
Well, it was in a private home. It was the
So it was like lectures.
Mr. Fred and his wife Minnie Bergman were wonderful, and they would arrange for speakers. We had some servicemen who were sons of famous rabbis, that is, servicemen in the army, and be invited out. And they were, and we were very interested in the Zionist movement. And there wasn't any Zionist youth organization of any size. It was our small group, and that was about it.
How old were you?
At that time, I was probably 14,
14.
15.
And in these lectures, what kind of lectures are you guys being given about kibbutz, about collective living?
No, I think we were mostly about the politics, what was going on with the Jewish communities in Europe, and about discrimination, and about the threat of Hitler was already in power.
Sure.
And so we were very aware of those things. And then we were, of course, aware of the of kibbutzim, because we certainly had kibbutzniks who, for one reason or another, were in Seattle. We had, who came and talked. We had a few, Hashomer Hatzair had a few young ladies as organizers trying to form a Hashomer Hatzair group.
Hachshara.
Yes. So that was, we were very alive and interested. There was an Anglo-Jewish newspaper, which was a very poor newspaper, but it got the Jewish Telegraphic Agency reports daily, off their machine, like an AP. And the editor of it was a very part-time job for a very wonderful, intelligent woman. But I would drop into her place and pick up just tons of the papers because she didn't have the time to go through all those things to see what's the best story or what have you. She did it very rapidly, and then she would leave things for me. And so I was getting
a lot of information.
Yes, that you would not get in the Anglo-Jewish newspaper or anything else. I was reading Forward, not in Yiddish, though. I was reading the one English column, which at the moment, God, I always remember the name of the man who wrote the column for years and years and years. And that's where I would read about more or less Jewish things on an international perspective.
What is it at the age of 14 that inspired you to go to these lectures, to read about what's happening in Palestine, to read about what's happening with the Jewry in Europe? What was it that gave you that spark of interest?
Well, because I felt very Jewish and very concerned with what was happening to Jewish people and what could Jews do here. And that was it, was I felt very much a part of it. I think all my colleagues in the organization.
Were you encouraged also by your parents to take this, to be in this kind of direction?
No, because my father, well, I discussed things with my father, and I think he was very pleased that I was going this way. He would have been even more pleased if I was going to shul, and so it was really the Bergman. They really deserve a monument for their concern.
Now, yeah.
And it attracted a very interesting group of people. And we did, and we were all friends for quite a while. And I think I found when I was going through papers, which now I misplaced again, but a photograph of a group of us picketing the Seattle's major hotel, the Olympic Hotel, carrying signs. Don't spill Jewish lives for Arab oil because of the British. That was just one expression of something that we were doing. And that was no, I mean, all this was spontaneous, and that's why when I started reading about the ships, and I was already a freshman at the university.
Yeah, well, I want to go back. I don't want to get there yet. What I want to ask you is, after Talmud Torah, you go to public school, to normal public school.
I was going to public school at the same time that I was going to Talmud Torah. Talmud Torah was after school. And then,
so you were always going to public school, then you were doing Talmud Torah.
Yes.
Talmud Torah ends when you're 13.
For me,
right?
yes.
For you. So in high school, in Seattle, in the late 30s, early 40s, are you confronted in Seattle with any sort of anti-Semitism?
I was very aware of anti-Semitism, but not if some of the fellows from the Cherry Street, the Jewish, were walking downtown. We walked through a Catholic neighborhood. There was and occasionally some of the boys there were anxious to jump on, especially if the smaller they were, the more victim they were. And but that didn't. Anti-Semitism simply we knew as you drive by a certain area in Seattle, and that's an area that no Jews could live there, but no Japanese, no Negroes, of course. And then that was such an exclusive area that some of the founders of that area, which was called Broadmoor, in a very nice area of Seattle, some of the people moved out and formed another group because they didn't like that Broadmoor was taking in Catholics.
So this was very waspy, as we call it.
Yes. And there was tennis clubs that was closed. And
the Jews, of course.
Yes.
That was very common in the 20s and 30s here, 40s even.
Yes.
When war breaks out, or even a little bit before, I'm going to throw a little date to you. November 1938, Kristallnacht in Germany. You guys hear about that, of course.
Of course. Very much.
Is there something pre-World War II that happened that really stuck it to you about your identity, your Judaism? I'm talking about before the war.
Yes. But of course, we were aware, especially in our group, that the terrible things going on and that nothing was stopping it. And the anti-Semitism in the United States, Father Coughlin.
In Detroit, where I'm from.
Yeah, oh, that's right.
Yeah.
And I finally saw videos of him. I've read about him, I've heard about him a lot. I read how influential he was in the United States.
His radio show.
Yes.
Yeah. Him and Henry Ford, they were like
yes,
in cahoots together.
Right. And the Protocols of Zion,
Of course.
Henry Ford.
The Eternal Jew.
Yes. So we were very aware of those things. And very, that's why we were active politically. I remember, God, how old was it when Roosevelt first ran?
Wait a sec. When Roosevelt first ran in 1932, 33?
Yes. And I was very young, and I was standing, passing out literature. Near the polling place, you have to be a certain distance.
Sure,
and,
of course.
And so it wasn't any, I guess the push was growing and growing and growing.
When America finally gets involved in World War II in December 1941, you're 14 years old, correct?
Correct.
How does that play out? I mean, you got an older brother, of course, who goes into the Navy or the Army. I can't remember what.
Army.
In the Army. Seattle is on the front line to Japan with, the western coast. What do you remember from those days?
Well, one thing I remember was that Reader's Digest, this very popular magazine, and I guess it's still popular. It had a story every Friday in my junior high school. You would give a report of something from a magazine that we're supposedly keeping up on what's going on in the world.
And you got to talk about it to the class or something.
Yes,
yeah.
And sometimes you would formally have to get up and talk about it. So it happened that would be December 5th, the Friday.
Before.
I reported on an article that said that Japan would never go to war with the United States because the pilots have poor eyesight, that Tokyo would burn down with one incendiary bomb, and all this nonsense from a very influential magazine. And then boom.
How does it affect you that there's a war going on?
Well,
now?
the first thing that affected me is that, are these Japanese crazy? Tokyo's going to burn down. They don't have an air force to speak of, et cetera, et cetera. That was the initial. I remember I had friends who ran over to the house and that there's going to be war and Japan did this and that. And it didn't register because I thought, but they can't do anything against the United States. But that changed within a day when I learned about what happened in Pearl Harbor. And then all I could think of is how could the Navy have been so mashugana to have all the ships in one place and so on. It was always, so that was what you asked about December 7th, 1941.
You're in high school. When do you, throughout high school, I'm talking about when you're like 16 and 17, you're a senior in high school, are you still involved with the same Jewish organization?
Yes, because my very close friend Elihu Bergman, was his parents who formed the organization and kept it going. We were certainly monitoring things in the news very closely. He was especially. I was, I was not interested in detail by detail. I mean, battle by battle, but just in general, what was happening. And so I was very aware, well, not only aware, but concerned.
And then, of course, rumors start to hit about the extermination of Jews in Europe. Do you remember hearing?
Yes, very much so, because again, the Jewish Telegraphic Agency reports had so much about that. And then occasionally there would be someone who came to talk at the Bergman house that had somehow gotten out of Europe. And people who were getting some direct news. And so it was very much an alive thing. I don't want to be too confused with so much things that I read even later. I mean, for example, things like this happened much later in the war, but not later in the war, but just before it started. The St. Louis, the boat St. Louis, where FDR would not even allow the children to be taken off the boat. This was a real shocker, but I figured he was so sensitive to anti-Semitism and his wanting to run for the second term that he was sacrificed. Oh, the Congress was terribly isolationist.
Yeah. I interviewed 3 days ago a Cuban Jew who was at the pier in Havana trying to get Jews off that boat. He later fought with the Etzel in 48 in Israel. He was on the Altalena ship.
Whoa.
Yeah. But he told me about that memory that he has as a child with the St. Louis in Havana. But they were on the docks trying to get them food and, but that must be a very conflicting and nasty feeling that you are 15, 16 years old, you're living in America, proud Jewish, well aware of your heritage, aware of what's going on, and the President of the United States and the Congress of the country that represents you are not willing to help these 1,000 people. How does that make you feel?
Not even a few hundred children out of that 1,000. I tried to rationalize this. I shouldn't say I tried to rationalize. I still believed in Roosevelt. I just couldn't understand this, especially when his wife, this wonderful woman, led a campaign and got many very prominent, famous women, whether they were actresses or writers or what have you, and they all said to the president, at least take the children off the boat. And unfortunately, from what I have read, I don't know if I read it at that time, but I think a couple of his Jewish advisors wanted him not to get involved with Jewish things so front pagey because of this anti-Semitism, and then he's got to prepare for his second term.
Or a third term. I'm just changing batteries for a second
Wow.
or another thing. But I want to get back, I just want to get back to my seat right now that we have the battery.
But
Sylvia,
Yes,
what time is it?
it is 3:12.
Three-
We have 45 more minutes before we have to go.
I have about another hour actually.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Will you keep it, yeah?
What time do you want to be wrapped?
Exactly in an hour.
Exactly an
Yeah.
hour at 4:15ish?
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
Sylvia just reminded me of something that I've told her a number of times. I guess another source of information was in the University District, University of Washington District. There was a church, a small church, but a very influential church. It's called Church of All Peoples. It was run by a very liberal a man who spoke out for justice for everything. And his church had a little pamphlet shop. It was not really a bookstore. There were a few books there, but it was full of anyone could have something on their tables there. And I used to bicycle out there and pick up stuff and read it. And that's where I got information. That's where I first read about, was it Simone, the Jewish gal who became a saint or something. but the political things, Socialist Workers' Party, I don't think the Republicans or Democrats officially ever put anything there, but to read about race riots, to read about discrimination, strong discrimination against the Negroes in the military, Army and Navy, and different social things of social injustice going on in our own country. And then I was also the Japanese who made a fool out of me for reading Reader's Digest and thinking it was a reliable magazine. I don't think anyone carried any information about the Japanese landing in the Aleutian Islands. Even people in Alaska didn't seem to know much about it.
Well, you know, it's also this is wartime censorship, but you're having access to a lot of knowledge, which is feeding you to become the person that you become in the future. And it shapes a political, social platform that you stand behind.
Yes, and I was very aware of sending the Japanese into a relocation
You were aware of it, or you weren't aware of it?
Very aware of it.
Very aware of it.
Because the 7th and 8th grade school that I went to, which was then called the junior high school, had many Japanese students. And and I had friends.
And they, boom, disappeared.
Yes. And
Sid, I wanna go a little forward. When the war ends in 1945, August 1945, in May in Europe it ends. You are 17 years old.
I think I was 18 then.
18 years old?
Yeah.
When you finish high school, you enroll into college. Is that correct?
Yes, but I was expected to be in the Army because I had one semester left in high school, but I figured I better get in the Army now because things were obviously wrapping down. And because I always had very poor vision, my brother said, why don't you just get into, I don't know if he was joking or not, but about, you're gonna be drafted into the Army, but why don't you go into the Marine Corps and enjoy you get to see Japan and things like that. And so I went to the Marine Corps they have, all the services had limited service. Means people who cannot go out and shoot.
Battle.
So the Marine Corps said, come 1 week before your 18th birthday. Then I'll know if there's openings in the limited service. That's good. But if there aren't, sorry. So I came 1 week before. That is, I returned 1 week before the 18th birthday. No opening there. So I went to the Navy, but there I didn't want to get into limited service. I wanted to actually pass so I could really be on a ship. And I remembered an uncle of mine who did eye exercises religiously, and he passed his exam to get into the Navy. I tried doing it quickly, but I started doing this, squinting, and the fellow at the desk looked up and said, "Hey, what are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I have a little something in my eye." He said, "Something in your eye, my eye, out." And that was the end of the Navy part.
Okay.
And then when it came to the Army, the war had already ended in Europe. And it was just imminent that it would be over, and I didn't want to go into the Army. So I answered questionnaires a little different than I did for the other services. And anyways, they weren't taking limited service. They were, L.U. Bergman, who's a few months younger than I am, got into the limited service, and he spent 6 months typing out discharge papers.
You didn't want to do that.
Well, if I realized then the advantage of having, he got 2 years of GI Bill for those 6 months.
Sure.
And
So what happened at the end? Did you go into the Army?
no, I went into I did not go into the Army. I had a delay for another health situation to do with my nose, and but then I went into the National Guard.
Okay, at this time of 1945, things in Palestine are starting to heat up.
Yes.
There's refugees coming in. The British are blocking them. The Haganah, the Etzel, the Lehi, each in their own ideology and in their own tactics are fighting against the British and the Arabs. How on earth do you get involved in this?
Well, when I was a freshman in November of 45, well, first of all, I was reading the New York Times. I was, when I was at the university, my first quarter, and I'd always go to Hillel House. And there was PM, a liberal newspaper. And I'd read about the ships being captured, the Jews, what was happening there. And so my friend L.U. Bergman and I figured maybe we could do something, maybe we could help. So was the summer of, no, I guess it was 46. We tried to get on we offered our services to a shipping company that we'd work for free to get on their ship, because it was a ship that was just being sold to a Greek company, and in the maritime papers that was available around here, the ship was, one of the stops it was going to make was Haifa.
Uh-huh.
So the captain of the ship said he would check with his, what do you call the company that handles the business end of the ships?
I forget.
So they were going to check with that, okay? And they did, and the company said, okay. Then we were to meet the ship in Portland. That was going to be its first stop, and it was in Vancouver, BC at the time. And then once we got down to Portland, got on the ship, the captain said he's sorry that he got an order from New York now not to take the Jewish fellows because of all the troubles in Palestine, and it might cause some troubles for the ship, or delays for the ship. So we said we'd jump off the ship before we got to Palestine. I was hoping we could get off close enough to shore in Egypt or something. And he was trying to be helpful, and he also, I thought, actually wanted the free labor. But that was turned down also, so that was one thing. And then when we got back, we went down to San Francisco, and there was nothing that we could learn that was going anywhere near Haifa.
So you and your friend are determined to get to Palestine.
Yes.
What was it that triggered you to go to Palestine?
To see if we could help out, if we could do something.
Is there any group you're affiliated with? Haganah, Palmach, Etzel, Lehi?
No, but that in the December of 45, a young woman who was a Jewish woman who was president of a national organization dealing with universities. She came and spoke about a tour she made of the universities in Europe and what the condition was after the war, etc. And she happened to mention that on her own she went on to Palestine because she wanted to see how the university, the Hebrew University survived, how they were affected. And then she came to Hillel to talk, and there were about a half a dozen of us. Incidentally, we had 200 Jews at that time at the university, and most of them
This is
were
the University of
Washington.
Of Washington.
And there were 2 Jewish sororities, there were 2 Jewish fraternities, and they weren't involved in anything to do like Zionism or Israel. And whenever there was any program that touched on the Middle East or what have you, I would look around, and because of the small Jewish community, I'd always see the same fellows and a few of the same girls, and a few of the Gentile girls who were just interested also. So that was, so then we went down to San Francisco to see if we could then get on a ship. Came back to Seattle, and there was I think a letter waiting for me from Keith Skydell. I don't think he had his name on it, but he said, because I'd already, I'll tell you how I got involved slowly. So it was to report, to go to so-and-so, a certain address, and you'll meet a shaliach, and that was it.
So you went to an address here in Seattle?
No, this was an address in Oakland, California, and we just came back from California.
Right.
So we weren't in a position to go back.
So you didn't go back?
We didn't go back.
Okay.
And the reason that came about, the Keith Skydell, the man in New York who used to be the head of, a professional head of one of the major Jewish youth Zionist organizations, when the first woman who came and talked at the Hillel House, it wasn't a formal talk, it was just, she was saying what she saw and something about the struggle that's going on. Then I told her about my friend and I tried to go to Palestine to see how we could help, what we could do. And we've been reading about the ships, and we would do anything to get on one of the ships, to work on one of the ships. So she ended up by saying, well, possibly I could help you, and that was it. A month later, phone call, Jewish woman who represented one of the Jewish organizations. She asked me to come and meet her at the hotel. She met me. I'll ask all sorts of questions about the Jewishness and interest and all that things, which was necessary because for security reasons. And then she ended up, I think I can be of help. That was it. Another month later, there was another woman from another organization. And she said the same thing about, I think I could help you. And I think that was about it. But then a form came about what is your experience, et cetera, et cetera. And so Bailey Nider, who at that time was just getting out of the, he was at MIT during the war and doing secret research, and he was, I think, went to work for GE, and I phoned him and told him about this, that this form, something came, so something's boiling, something's going. So he went down to the address, and that's where he met Keith Skydell. And from there it was, Sylvia just found the telegram that he got on a certain date. Can you come on such and such a date? But unfortunately, Bailey Nider could not come, and we were all three determined to be together if we could. So that was that. That's how we eventually got on. And Keith Skydell used to joke that we were the mail order recruits.
So what year do you get on the boat?
Physically, actually got on the boat in 1947.
When?
No, 46.
46.
Wait a minute. No, it was 47.
47?
But we were already in contact at 46. In fact, I think the first time.
Are you with the joint, the Jewish agency? Basically, you're under their wing, correct?
I wasn't being aware of anyone's wing. Everything was so.
What are you told you're going to go do? Where are they taking you?
Oh, I knew it was going to be on a boat.
Going to Palestine or going to Europe to
To
help?
Palestine.
To Palestine. Now, do you remember where your boat docked from?
It's where it started from?
Yeah.
Absolutely, in Miami, Florida. And
Name of the boat?
the name of the boat was the Paducah.
Paducah.
Built in 1904, and it was it had a career of being a Coast Guard gunship during World War I, and it was still in operation as a training ship from World War II, and it was pretty much on its last leg when it was acquired by the organization that was handling all this.
And this is Aliyabet.
Aliyabet. And Schulman, who was his company, bought the ship, but we didn't know that then.
Right. And how many people are you on the ship?
I think about, I think it was closer to 35.
35 guys?
Yes.
And what flag is the ship sailing under?
Panama.
Panama.
And on the ship was the Mossad guy, although the name Mossad was, I hardly ever heard that, was always the Palmachniks. And
The Sabras.
the Sabras. And this Mordecai Limon, I highly recommend it. A book came out about him, but it was only in Hebrew. And he was fantastic. We were so lucky to have a person like that on the ship. And our captain, the first captain that was hired for the Paducah was,
Yeah.
how many minutes?
No. We're fine. I just have a name that on my phone of somebody that was on your ship that I want to ask you about. Yeah. The first captain?
The first captain, he was down on the ship, and I was asked to, the crew came from all over. So I spent a week with Keith Skydell in his office. My friends Elihu and Bailey, their mothers came to New York to say goodbye to them, etc.
But the boat left for Miami, you said.
Yes.
Yeah.
But in New York is where we formed. And that's where we had our great training to be sailors.
You had a hachshara there. So in New
No,
York,
not really.
In New York, you guys are getting prepped for the voyage. Then you go down to Miami to actually.
Yes, but the prep was so minor, and the guys who came 2 days before they were to come from different cities, Keith Skydell asked me, "Where are you staying?" He said, and I told him at the International House at Columbia University. Do you think you could get the boys in there? what sort of accommodations? I said, it's just a cot in a basement. And and again, he said, well, do you think you could get the guys in there? So I went out, and the next day I went out because I got back at night late. So the next morning I went to the office and told them about, I'm part of a Hakshara. These fellows are coming, we're all going to New Jersey to train as farmers for Palestine. Fine. And so everyone could come. And Keith Skydell was flabbergasted because he was supposed to have hotel rooms for the people. And how was he going to get it for, I don't know how many guys, probably only 20 or so fellows were coming from different cities. So the training was, the front of the ship is a bow.
It was very minor.
Very minor.
Now, I'm reading here that you had on your ship, on the Paducah, somebody who became very famous later on in the world of psychology.
Oh, yes. Gutman.
No. Lawrence Kohlberg?
Lawrence Kohlberg knew very well, yes.
He was on your boat?
Yes. He was, when he joined it in New York, because when in Miami, we went through, some guys came, a few of them picked up some information, they decided they didn't want to go. We had to flee Miami because there were always attempts, the different ways to stop an Aliyah ship. And one of the ways is to require the country that gave the flag for ostensibly to be a banana ship for the Americans were doing so much work, the American State Department, for the British State Department.
Stop you guys.
Yes, to say the boat is not going to be a banana
boat.
And so forth.
So
and
why did you guys have to run out of Miami?
Because there was about to be some legal action to tie the ship up. So we just quickly left, and we didn't even have enough oil. We were lucky, we were hoping we could get to New York City. We went to New York, and there some other guys quit or were asked to quit. And there we got three or four new guys, and Kohlberg was one of them.
What kind of person was he?
Well, he was a very quiet guy. He was, but I knew after we left New York, which also was one of these instant things we had to get out, we just hoped we would have enough fuel to get to the Azores and get fuel there. And when we did get to the Azores, the only fuel we got was through the black market to pay off some guys who sold some barrels to us. Then we went to Lisbon expecting to get all the oil that we needed. Could not. The British were so active everywhere. And so
especially in Portugal. The British and the Portuguese have the oldest naval agreement in history, which still stands till today.
I didn't know
that. From the
that.
1650s or yeah.
For goodness sake.
I'm asking you about Lawrence Kohlberg because Lawrence Kohlberg has a theory called the Heinz theory. Are you familiar with this?
No. I know that he became famous for...
He went to Harvard. He became a very famous psychologist who believed in human psychology. It's called the Heinz dilemma, and basically the Heinz dilemma is a theory the Heinz dilemma is frequently used example in many ethnic and minority classes. One well-known version of the dilemma used by Lawrence Kohlberg stages moral development. So it's basically saying, if your son is dying from a disease and the medicine is very expensive and you can't afford it, are you going to steal it or not? This is the Heinz dilemma. And the reason I'm asking is because I wanted to ask you, I'm sure this experience that he went through, Lawrence Kohlberg, an Aliyah Bet, going illegally to Palestine to help. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes, I do very well. The things that I read on his obituary was that he was had the ideas for secondary education or junior colleges and the importance of them. But let me just tell you what. So we fled New York, and that when we're out in sea a little bit, and
Wait a second.
the boat,
Who was standing at the stern of the boat?
Kohlberg.
Okay.
And I didn't know who he was, he didn't know who I was, and so I introduced myself.
This is in New York?
On the ship leaving New York.
Yeah. Right as he got on. Yeah.
He got on
Yeah,
in New York.
Yeah. So he
So when he said his name was Kohlberg, I, being this sort of pseudo left-winger, said, any relation to the famous, I think the horrible Kohlberg, who's very involved with supporting the China lobby, that's Chiang Kai-shek, and who supports Senator Joe McCarthy. I think I said any relation to that son of a bitch.
Okay, and what did he say?
He said, yeah, that's my father. And so that somehow or another later we were involved in a few things and went to picnics in Bayonne, France together, and but I didn't really have much of a chance to talk to him all the time. Elihu Bergman did talk to him a lot. But jumping forward, a Jewish fellow who was a professor emeritus of, I don't know if it was Chapel Hill or some university in South Carolina. His field was German history. But he was writing a book on Arthur Kohlberg, the father. And he was doing all this research at Stanford in the Hoover Tower, or whatever they call it. And so in his research, the father was saying how his son, he lost his son to the communists. His son has joined a communist ship, something to that effect. That was, so the fellow doing all this research, and I have a file on him because he came up to Seattle a few times, and doing the research, then he tried to find out about the ship. And then he learned about the Paducah.
Paducah.
And then he learned about Patzer's book.
Now, do you remember the date that you guys left New York? Roughly? What month it was?
I have it in writing, but I don't remember it.
It's in 46 though, right? 1946?
I think we did all this in 47.
47. Let me put it this way.
At
So
eight-
you guys get to Lisbon. From Lisbon to France,
Yes.
Marseille,
First we went to the Azore Islands,
right. Then to Lisbon,
and then to Lisbon,
then to France.
right.
In France, are you guys taking on any refugees?
No.
No. What do you?
Strictly to finish the job that wasn't finished in Miami, to put more the beds, so to speak, the
Yeah.
boards. And everything was going very smoothly. And God, the condition of the ship, we finally did an exercise lowering a lifeboat.
Yeah.
It took a good 40 minutes to lower the lifeboat. Everything was so rusty and this and that.
It was a piece of junk.
Yes, the whole ship
The whole
was.
ship was a piece of junk.
Yes.
But you guys made it to Marseille. You made it to Marseille.
No, we didn't go to Marseille.
Where did you go in France?
Bayonne.
Bayonne.
It was a very quiet little.
And are you met there by anybody from the Palmach?
Yes, but definitely. I think that's where Mordecai Limon came on the ship.
Okay.
And that's the Northland, or was a sister ship That was a good ship. That was one that was used by the Israel Navy right from the start.
Yeah.
And that eventually carried 2,500 people. We carried 1,450 people, I think it was.
So where do you get
The people, like going through the Mediterranean, up
you going up the Adriatic?
through the Adriatic where there were mines, and up the Dardanelles, into the Black Sea, got to Romania.
Constanza?
Well, we didn't touch Romania, but the pilot came aboard, and then the pilot took us down to Varna, Bulgaria. And that's where we stayed, and that's where the people came. There was a train that came from Romania, blacked out, came at night, and the first ship that was loaded was the Northland, the 2,450 or whatever.
Now, these are displaced refugees from the Holocaust.
Yes. And that was an experience that made everything worthwhile. To see human beings who we read about, seen photographs and so forth, coming aboard, and they seen, I guess they were most of them were Hashomer Hatziar, and they were young people. And they came aboard. You know, to me, it was such an emotional experience to see these people. How fortunate they were, they survived. But the tragedies they must have been through. And they, in turn, to see if I was really an American Jew. And so a group of ladies accumulated, well, one had the nerve to be the spokesperson. I was directing them to go down to where they were supposed to stretch out on those boards. So the lady asked me in Yiddish, which I understood, is the Mutter bist du Yid? Yes. And your Tata bist du Yid? Yes. Then verwusst du nicht speak Jewish, she said. Not Yiddish, she said Jewish. And then she tells all the other ladies, and they're all, smiling and so forth. But I guess it meant a lot to them to know that actually
somebody cares.
Volunteers from America, yes.
How'd that make you feel?
It made me feel very, very touched, very good, very proud that I was doing what I was doing. And on Cyprus.
So you load the boat in Varna.
Yes.
How many refugees do you guys take? 1,500?
We took 1,500. The Northland
took 2,000.
One night, like 2,450, I believe, very close to that. So we went to Varna, and going through the Dardanelles was really something.
On the way back.
Yes. And here's another reward for being on the crew, that our ship used to break down quite often, the steering gear. And I was able-bodied seaman, and I was an able-bodied seaman simply because in New York City, they asked me to be the purser, and I said, I'm the last person in the world that should be a purser. No one can read my writing. My printing is like a fourth grader. But Keith Skydell insisted. Oh, I started to tell you, which I didn't finish. I've got to tell you that the first captain of the ship. So I'm down there with papers. I think I even took maybe money to him. And also the flag, the Jewish flag. And I was told, this is not to be raised until you're given the word, to raise officially the word. So the first captain goes out to the airport. He asked me to go with him to meet.
This is where?
In Miami.
Oh, okay.
It was a chartered flight. We went out to the airport. It was dark already. He talks to a few of the people there. I don't know who he was talking to because I was talking to a couple of guys I knew. And then he motions for me to, let's go back to the ship. And there he wrote a letter of resignation. And so from what I learned, that there was a very urgent thing. They had to replace the captain. And they were very, very, very lucky that they could get Rudolf Patzert. He was there in about a day or so. But and Patzert wrote in the book, if you'd like a copy, I can give you a copy. I always collect these. There's only one printing, and I try to pick them up because every so often someone would like to have the book.
Stanley, Sid, unfortunately, I have to move a little bit forward, but
Okay.
I understand that the name of the captain at the end of the day was?
Rudolf Patzert, P-A-T-Z-E-R-T.
Now, you're going down, you pick up the refugees.
Yeah, but let me give you one sentence that he wrote in his book. He said, it's probably foolhardy of me to take on a job on such a old, rusty boat. I can only, and with the crew, an inexperienced crew, I can only hope that their idealism will pull us through. And that's probably what happened, the whole thing. That one thing, the way you summed it up. Okay, excuse me, go
That's
ahead.
fine, that's fine.
It's 10 till.
It's 10 to, okay. Because we haven't even gotten to Israel yet, and
Oh,
yeah. So you guys arrive in Palestine.
we were caught within the 3-mile limit, and it was a very dramatic thing. All these destroyers coming in, and because they can't get too close because of the 3-mile limit, and it's too shallow, and so they have to act very fast. And for reasons you've probably read about, one ship was captured by the British. They took it, and that was challenged in some international court, and Britain lost, and therefore they waited thereafter for the 3-mile limit, then boom, to catch the things. So, all right, so we're in Bulgaria, we're waiting for the ship to be finished, etc. We got fuel, go through the Dardanelles, and while going through the Dardanelles, I felt just barely that the steering gear was breaking down, just a sort of a vibration. And I shouted out and so forth, and sure enough, that was enough of a warning to stop us from hitting a very dangerous spot in the Dardanelles. So Patzer writes in his book, Sid has become a real wheelsman, which was, to me, graduation certificate or something.
Yeah.
So then, the thing I was most concerned about when we'd get out of the Dardanelles, when all these people, and so many of them would come up on deck. Of course, they couldn't possibly, but it was packed. And I was wondering, what's the reaction going to be when they see these British destroyers? I would think they'd be wailing and so upset. Instead, they're on top of the deck, and there are these 2 destroyers on each side of us, and they're singing Hatikva. And it was just wonderful. It was a beautiful sight. And then, all right, so eventually when we're caught, and everyone goes to Cyprus.
So the destroyers take you guys to Cyprus?
No, they took us into Haifa, and then as soon as we were in Haifa, we put on taken down the ship, walking along pier, and go on what they call the Empire Rest. Was the prison
Like a
for
police
carrying
station?
prisoners.
Like a police station, like the county jail.
Yes, and it was a 24-hour trip to Cyprus, and they were always looking for the crew. They wanted Americans. They wanted to dangle Americans to embarrass the State Department. You're allowing Americans to aid and abet illegal immigration. And the FBI gets hell for allowing this to. Why wasn't it stopped there? This is illegal.
So the British are looking for you.
Yes.
Do you manage to avoid them?
Yes, because they, well, I was worried that because they took photographs when we went through the Dardanelles, they had a plane circling and circling, taking pictures. But once you were hauled into Haifa and walked down the plank, you're sprayed with DDT. And when you're sprayed with DDT, you're all white. And I thought, great, camouflage. I even turned my head so I could get another treatment of it, not knowing how dangerous that was. So what's on Cyprus, they're officers going back and forth with different Quonset huts. And the first one, they're asking all sorts of questions. And mind you, they had our 1,400 people going through, and the Northland right behind us with all their people. So they had to move everyone mass production. And there were women at the desk asking questions, and they're filling out forms, and officers are behind them, just going with their stick, walking back and forth. And so naturally I'm asked my name, and mainly what country, what language, whatever she said, I would just answer Manishtan or Halaloza. And then she looked up and then realized I must be one of these ignorant Americans. And then she continued to fill out the whole thing because she didn't want to carry on.
She was Jewish.
Alert the guard. Yes, they were all, fortunately, all these people, because I guess all these girls knew several languages.
Yeah.
And that, so then we get settled into Cyprus. And Cyprus for a few months, then the Haganah manages to get a number of us off, and were then taken back to Haifa, to a naval base, put on buses with guards with machine guns.
British guards? British guards?
Yes, British guards. And taken to Athlete.
Athlete, uh-huh.
But I escaped. I was the only one that escaped on my own.
But didn't the British figure out that you're an American? Didn't they know that you're an American?
The only one they actually pulled out was one fellow from our ship called Heavy. He was tattooed from his neck to his ankles, and everything, symbols of. He couldn't deny he was an American, but he did deny he was an American, and he was locked up in solitary confinement on Cyprus for I don't know how long, until he was finally released. And also, for some reason, anyways, because you only have minutes, I escaped by simply, I thought I was going to swim. And I knew that Mocha Limon was going to swim. Well, he went off much further than I would ever dare try to swim. And also, I knew I couldn't possibly keep up with him, and therefore he would know where he's going. I later learned that there was someone flashing a light so that he could get there. Because if you get to end up in an Arab village, which was near the big oil refinery,
In Haifa, yeah.
that would be could be disastrous. So then I was waiting till it got closer, and then I talked to one of the Mossad guys who was from the Northland, and I mentioned I'm planning to swim, and he said, that'll be your last swim. They're dropping death charges. So that was out of the question. when we finally got there, and people are all told to get off, and they get on buses, and each bus had this guards on motorcycles with guns, and then finally some soldier came up to me and motioned to go. And I said, no, I'm a journalist. So he goes away. Then I didn't know what's going to be next. I see a truck coming on with a bunch of guys, and they were obviously longshoremen. So they started quickly picking up bags, knapsacks, what have you, and putting it on the truck. So I walked over to them, and I started picking up things. And they tried getting me, no, to go. They couldn't speak English. And finally, somehow they called the boss, huge giant of a man. And he comes on the board and he tells me to get off. And I said, no, we're told if we could escape, to escape. And so, I don't know, we exchanged a few more words, and he just walked away. Then I saw in the corner of my eye when I was picking up some stuff, that same soldier who said, get off, with two Navy officers, young guys, and they were looking and looking and looking. I just kept working and working. And then they left. And I assumed that they figured that if they tried to arrest me or something, that the longshoremen, this was all a plot, or I was writing I just wanted from a higher up to what to do. So I got on the truck, the big guy came back and motions for me to get on the truck. I got on this baggage. That was the most dangerous thing I felt the whole damn trip, because the bags were loose. It's not like suitcases being, piled neatly. And then the truck got through the gates. The giant and the truck driver were showing their IDs, and I laid back as if I was asleep. And we got out, and after the truck went a little distance, and he gets out, motions for me to come, and there I was in a room which apparently had radio equipment, and the man interrogated me. He had very protruding teeth, and he was very thorough. And then he says, someone's going to take you up to where you'll be staying. It was on Hadara Carmel. And I got in there, and within and I was quite hungry. Told me to go to the lunchroom, and I started to eat. And someone said, no, I go into this room. So they took pictures. 3 hours later, I had my Palestine ID. In fact, Sylvia just took it. I actually still saved it with, the photograph, Palestine.
Do you have that?
Yeah, I have some stuff to show you.
Can you? Okay, and
the original is around here somewhere. So anyways, that was getting my first experience. And it was a thrilling thing, except when I sat down to eat, the waiter, they must have known that I was one of the escaped, because apparently that whole place was used by the Haganah. But the waiter doesn't say welcome, or this or that. He says, do you want to buy a lottery ticket? And that, I've never forgot that, because it hit me like a slap in the face or something. That was a minor thing. But then, and thereafter it's, we go on a tour. You can go on a tour.
When is this 40? This is late 47.
Yes.
So this is after the UN declared the partition.
On this tour that I was, when a minibus with one of the Mossad guys, and there were 5 or 6 of us from different ships, the guys I didn't even know. And when we were outside of Jerusalem, one night outside Jerusalem, there was all this sudden singing, dancing, and everything, and that was the announcement from the UN. Everyone was all very excited.
Where did the Haganah place you after?
The placing was in a hotel right at the foot of Ben Yehuda Street. Every time I go to Israel, I always feel I'd like to stay there again.
Zion Square Hotel?
I think that was it.
Yeah.
And there was and during my time, the time we were there, this would have been November 30th, that there was a movie house there. There's also tall Sudanese selling chestnuts, I think.
Chestnuts, hold on. Are you participating with the Haganah? Are you in any activity?
Here?
No, in Palestine.
I went to on November 30th, the tour continued. We went to the old city. We were told it was November 12th. We were told we had to leave. I mean, the Mossad guy, one Mossad fellow apparently came to our Mossad guy, and there was a little sort of whispering, and then our man said, "Let's go." And he explained that it's very dangerous, it's going to be troubles. And we were put up at the hotel we were just talking about. But that day, before going to the old city, we were at the university. And at the university, there was a big round table or oval table. Everything was in English, and it was about Jewish history, Jewish culture, et cetera, et cetera. And it was a course that just had begun not too much earlier. And I expressed an interest. I'd sure like to go to attend this. And I was told that I could. I said, but I don't have any documents of my to prove that I'm, a university student. Makes no difference. And they even put me up at a pension, and I don't know if I was. It seemed to me I was only there for a week. All I know is that the university was closed.
Right, because of the fighting.
Yes.
And until when are you in Israel? Till when are you there? Are you in Israel on May 14th, 1948? Are you in Israel?
No. Here's the deal. I went to Mayan Baruch. I thought I would stay there. Then everything was English. I'll never learn Hebrew this way.
Right.
And they were also bringing in guys from the strip between Jaffa and Tel Aviv. Florentine. Yes, and they were going to be there for military training.
Yeah.
So I figured, well, I can leave, and I'll go to a place. So I went to a Hashomer Hatzair kibbutz along the Sea of Galilee, and I was there, and I liked it. First, I thought I'd like to be a shepherd. Then someone said, to be a shepherd, you have to be either a moron or a philosopher. And I knew that I wasn't a philosopher. So seriously, I thought it like that. So I'm planting trees with the crew, and I thought this was nice. Then I got the headquarters of the Hashomer Hatzair sent someone to get me and told me that there's a message for me. And I got worried that maybe something happened to my mother in Seattle or something. And it turns out that I was to go to Tel Aviv and meet at a certain address.
Okay.
And there I met the same man that interviewed me so thoroughly in Haifa. And he wants me to take an Italian sea captain to Marseille, and then I would get on another ship that's waiting there. They're forming a crew. So I learned that the Italian is traveling under Polish papers. He doesn't speak English, I don't speak Italian. So I mentioned this man about this language situation. Yeah. And so he said, he apparently thought I could create, somehow he said, you can do it. And I did it. We got through the Lod. We spent 3 days at Lod, 3 nights, because the little plane at DC-3 was the Danish airline plane, which crashed after we got off. It was not a serious crash, it was just, no one was. But, so anyway, I won't go into details, finally got to Marseille, took the man to an address, and it was in looks like a government-type apartment building for low-cost housing or something. And there was a young man and a woman, I think there was a baby there, and they didn't ask me to sit down, to have a cup of coffee or anything. They just said, thank you, and that was it.
Who was it?
What?
What was it?
Who was it?
Yeah.
I don't know. It was the address I gave. They obviously were waiting for him. And it would be funny if that was a wrong address or something. But no, they were obviously...
So you accompanied an Italian skipper to Marseille?
Yes. Got him all the way there.
And you didn't know who he was or whatever? Nothing?
With the captain?
Yeah.
Well, I knew he was the captain. I knew that he beached the ship and that...
But why did they ask you to accompany him?
Why was I made the purser? Why was I the advance man to go down?
So what happened from Marseille?
I think he was impressed that I escaped on my own without any...
What happened with you after Marseille?
After Marseille, I went down where I was told it was like a dormitory for merchant seamen. And there were guys from the Exodus crew who were waiting there. And I joined them. We were waiting for a ship. The ship was delayed, and I was looking forward to it. I was going back to, I was going to pick up people somewhere, and I was going back to Israel. So then I realized, or at least someone told me, but is your passport still valid? And I realized I didn't even have a passport with me because in the United States, when finally it was accepted and all that, there were instructions, do not carry any identification that you're an American. I have seaman's papers, but that doesn't mean you're an American. It just means the Coast Guard gave you the papers. But that was it. So I had to apply for a passport, and part of my papers shows that I was, I left the ship with, the official stamp and everything 6 months earlier. So how do you account for your time for the 6 months? So I had to sit down and write a big spiel about what I did for the 6 months.
Yeah.
And apparently the consul general in Marseille didn't object to it, but his secretary, when she handed back the paper or whatever it was, she said, her comment was, "You have quite an imagination, don't you?" Because I wrote that I was traveling, but I was with a married woman. I can't possibly reveal her name. It was, and so forth and so forth. And places I had been, more or less.
So where did you end up after that?
After that, then I went to Paris, where the other guys were hanging out waiting for the ship. And I was there, and then in Paris we got word to go to New York because there was a ship to be, and it was a former presidential yacht and so forth. And I thought this would be great. Get to New York, and I went to. When I got to New York, I went to a hotel that was given an address, and I only had enough money to buy a candy bar for my dinner that night. It was a Sunday night. I think it was an Easter parade going on. And so the next day I went to an address, and I had no idea who was there or what, but they said that there's going to be a delay. And we're telling the guys to go home. But for me, it would be an expense for them to go to Seattle. And someone said, "Now, wait a minute. They're from Seattle. Do you know anything about Boeing?" And I said, "Of course, everyone knows about Boeing. Do you have any connections there?" I don't know what you mean by connections, but I have certain contacts with people. So then they tells me that what they need. Years later, realized this is probably land and labor.
Yeah.
But when I got back to Seattle, I'd get communications always signed by Jim. And I was very effective in getting the type of people they wanted, of aviation electrical people, aviation mechanics. And that was
So
about...
Israel was declared a state. You were actually here.
Yes. And it was also illegal to do any recruiting for it, to do anything, to send materials or manpower. But what I said to everyone, this was on my own, I just decided to do it this way. A friend of mine in New York City is with the Specialized Employment Organization. And right now they need people, aviation mechanics, aviation such and such, to work in Burma, because there was fighting going on at that time. So I figured if anyone would be willing to go to Burma, they'd be probably willing to go to Israel. And that was that. At one point, I signed up for one class at the University of Washington, so I could say I'm a university student, but I'm helping this friend in New York.
We're going to have to...
Okay.
No, listen, I'm going to have to stop, but I actually...